Hi, everyone, and welcome to Tea and Murder, the Lizzie Borden podcast. I'm Kim Eberly, your host, with my co host, Shelly Dietzick. Hi, Shelly.
Hi.
How have you been?
Well, been a busy weekend. We've had a garden tour of over 300 people come through our backyard, but it's nice to sit down and chat with you.
And it's amazing that you had that today and now you're here right now. So busy, busy day. And beautiful
Busy.
flowers. I saw some awesome. You guys have
Oh,
green thumbs for sure.
oh, my husband has them, but I enjoy looking at the flowers
So,
and picking.
yeah, so I'm really excited tonight to be at this podcast. We haven't seen each other in about 2 months, and we have a very special guest. Hey, Judy. We have a very special guest tonight, Thomas Mauriello, and he has a long list of credentials, which too long a time to name all of them. But he's definitely a forensic expert, and we're happy to have him. So, Tom, come on. We're just gonna start now.
Here I am. Welcome to be. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you.
Hello, hello to
Um,
both of you.
so Tom, you've been studying. You've been doing crime scene investigation for over 40 years now, and
Yeah,
you're a professor at Maryland, right? You
University of Maryland.
University of Maryland, and I mean, you and we spoke in maybe 10 years ago. You slightly remember, but about the Borden case, and
Hmm.
that's why I'm so happy to have you on because I know you know a lot about it. And you were one of the first ones to even hold the hatchet that they now have at the museum. I recently put a video up that you were in with Tom Lang, which, wow, talk
Yeah,
about, he was one of the guys in the OJ trial. I think um, he was the investigator or,
he was the principal investigator for the O.J. Simpson case.
right. And you and him got together and broke out Abby's scarf. And, you tell us a little bit about that. That was so cool.
Well, we were told that we were going to be able to film viewing some of the physical evidence that was at the historical societies. And we went there and we had our gloves on and everything else. And we weren't sure, we weren't told ahead of time what we were going to look at and what we were going to see. They just kind of handed the stuff over to us. So they showed us the bedspread that had the blood, still has blood spatter that you can see, and we were unfolding it, and inside there was this. What would you call it, Kimber? What is it's supposed to be something that Abby was wearing on her head. Is
Oh, a
that? I
He
scarf.
think
had
that's
Or
two.
a
Shelley
scarf.
knows.
A scarf.
Her
I
gown.
see. I said scarf like a bum because I'm from Boston. I'm from Massachusetts, by the way, so you know. So I'm
And
saying it
it's
right.
good you say that because not men back in the 1800s, a lot of them didn't know the names of women's clothing. So that's sort of
Yeah, yeah.
it's
Well,
true
and I
today.
still don't, I guess. But anyways, we were looking at it, and it was it's really broken down, and we very carefully opened it up, and it's literally fallen apart, and but while we were there, and I happened to have the hatchet head in my hand, and by the way, while I was holding it, the piece of wood slipped out and everybody started screaming. I had to push
Oh,
it back in again. It
oh
was just
wow.
just loose. But anyways, I just was looking down, and I'm always looking to see how things fit like a puzzle. And I just happened to, view the edge of the hatchet and view this one particular slit that was there, and it just kind of slid in. Now, I didn't suggest that I had uncovered this unbelievable evidence to prove anything. I just happened to notice that it slid in there. Of course, when they did the TV show, they indicated that we found this new piece of information that kind of really wasn't that really the case. But, um, it was just kind of interesting that it did fit in there perfectly.
So, in this crime scene, I want to start off with the house itself. And Kenny, you can bring up, I think it's number one, the house. I'm gonna,
I'm gonna,
yep,
I'm,
okay.
we're frozen, so I'm gonna go back again. I'll be
Yeah,
right
I
back.
got you. I'm sorry, Tom.
And
So,
so am I. So we'll both sign
oh,
back on.
okay. And here I am. So while they're logging back in, Kenny, you want to bring up the picture of the house? All right. Okay, so we're back. So this is the house. Can you see
Mhm.
that?
Yep.
Okay, so I want to talk about this first, and I think it's very important. We talk about Lizzie being the murderer, or somebody from the outside coming into the house. And this house was like a barricade. I mean, if you look at the front, it had fencing in the front. So somebody would have to go through the fencing, and the only way in was the side back door. And then in the back of the house, you can't see it in this picture, but in the back, they had, I want to say, a 7-foot fence with barbed wire on top of it. So it
Mhm.
was really, it was like a mini fortress. So, Kenny, you can go to slide 2. So this is the layout of the inside of the house and where the bodies were. Um, Andrew's body was on the first floor and Abby's was on the second floor. But if you notice on the first floor, like I always found it fascinating how the house was designed. So, Tom, I want to talk about the timeline and one of my questions, and feel free, anyone who's in this chat right now, to, ask questions. Um, as far as the timeline goes, and this murder was really unusual because the murders were an hour apart. About for an outsider to come in, tell me what your thoughts are on who you think the murderer is, and having an outsider come in.
First of all, I never ever answer that question when I'm working a case and a case hasn't been adjudicated. But because this case was adjudicated back in 1893,
Shoot.
I feel comfortable in saying unequivocally that I believe Lizzie Borden committed these crimes. Um, there's, as far as anybody coming from the outside in, first of all, there was no real evidence of that happening. And more importantly, if it was somebody from the outside, they had to commit a crime and then they had to go hide themselves for an hour and a half, and continue to have that rage. Whoever committed these crimes, they were exhibiting a significant amount of rage and hatred, because you know, you can't forget the fact that um, Emma was hit 18 times with an object.
You mean Abby
And the
was
fa-
Abby? Abby
Yeah.
was hit. Abby was
Abby,
hit.
I'm sorry,
That's
not
okay.
Emma. God, God.
That's okay.
Abby was hit, and the father was hit 10 times. Not, that kind of screws up the poem. It wasn't 40 and 41; it was 18 and 10. But even that, 18 times, they hit somebody 18 times. That that's true rage. That emotion comes from for a reason.
And that was a
And
question I wanted to ask you too. So, if you hit somebody on the head, I think it was 18, but then they didn't count the one, which made it 19. I think the first one was like in the ear or something. But anyway, hitting somebody that many times and then coming down from that adrenaline flow and and waiting an hour and then building it back up again, how does that happen? That is really unusual, right?
Well, I'm not a psychologist, but the bottom line is if we would understand the motive for the first crime, then maybe we could better understand how that could happen for the second crime.
Well,
But we don't
can,
know that.
can
We
I
just
ask
we
you
don't.
an opinion? Is it possible that Abby was the intended victim, and when Andrew came home and Lizzie didn't have a chance to leave the house to establish an alibi, could he have been collateral damage and it was necessary to kill him because he would have put two and two together? And
It really
part two of
Yeah, it really depends on what you think was in the mind of Lizzie Borden. Did she just want to make sure that she got all the money that she thought she deserved from her father? But did she also want to move out of the middle class area of Fall River and move into the hill area where ultimately she bought Maplecroft? If she wanted both those things, then both had to go. because the father wasn't going to change his ways.
Oh, also a follow-up to that. Is it true that quite often when you have a parricide, such as in the Menendez case, statistically speaking, it's often someone who lives in the house or a child or someone they know when you have a
It's
situation like this?
more times than not. It's obviously somebody that they know, that are
Mhm.
close. Again, there was some talk of somebody, that Andrew Borden had an argument with somebody earlier that week or earlier that day, whatever, and about money or something. Well, that may be fine, but again, we're talking about a crime that included significant emotion and rage, and the
It was
I
personal.
can't think of any. I can't think of anyone else, or we don't know of anyone else. Remember, we're talking about a crime that happened where nobody that was involved with it is alive. So, all we have is transcripts and historians' perception of what they believed was going on. And so it's hard to, you know, be definitive about that.
So, Kenny, do the next slide. This is a picture of Andrew.
Again,
And
I'm going to have to leave you because I'm frozen again.
okay, we're having a little technical difficulties tonight, but hopefully it'll take a few seconds and they'll be back on. Um, okay, there we go.
Okay.
All right. So this is Andrew. I know it's a horrible, ghastly picture, but
Well, you can't
um,
really see it. It's black and white, so it's not that
yeah.
bad.
And I from what I understand, these photos were actually historical because it was some of the first photographs ever done at an actual crime scene in the U.S.
Yes. Yes,
So
absolutely. Yeah.
that's amazing in itself.
Hmm.
But what you've noticed and you told me was the coat underneath. There's a pillow and then the white doily and then the pillow, and right underneath you see this coat part slipped under there. You came up with a theory about how Lizzie could have killed Andrew, and within the timeline, because it was only like what 15 minutes, not even, when the police showed up at the house. So she had a very limited window to clean up, if any. So I want to talk about the blood spatter and how you feel she could accomplish that.
Well, there's a couple of things that we learned from this very picture. Most of the times when we see shows about Lizzie Borden, the murders on television, just before Andrew is about to get struck the first time, his eyes open up. Well, that's impossible. There's no way. He was sleeping. If you look at his body is relatively relaxed. If he saw death coming, he would experience what we call a cadaveric spasm, where the sympathetic nervous system reacts, and he would have put his hands up, and rigor mortis would have set in immediately in his fingers and his hands and his extremities. It's called instantaneous rigor. You don't see that at all. So it appears that he didn't see this coming, that he was probably sleeping. Now, here's a man who's dressed up well. Why he would take his coat, fold it or roll it in a ball or whatever it was, and put it underneath and lay on it doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, the big question is, and we've always said this, is where did the blood go? If Lizzie Borden did this, how did she have time to clean herself up? And it was my theory, and I still hold that theory, is that I believe that she was standing behind the wall in the dining room, that she wrapped her right arm with the coat. And if, again, assuming that she did this and that she used some type of object, whether it was the hatchet, whatever, and she was able to uh, protect herself with the wall and the coat around her arm, and and caused the blows to happen. The blood spatter came back on her arm, but the arm was covered with the coat, and then the wall, and the wall protected her. She takes the coat off and puts it underneath his head. So what blood would she have? She would have had blood on her hands, etc. And she could have had some blood spots, but not what would have been if she was in the room directly. Because normally, and I've done this experiment on a few times in the lab, when you're hitting somebody like that, the blood spatter tends to go in the direction that the force is coming from, and which would have been the wall. If she was behind the wall, it would have been the wall, and her arm. But again, if my theory was correct, that she wouldn't have got much on her dress at all. So that's what else? Why would his coat be underneath in the manner it was?
Yeah, and
You know,
there's two other things. I don't know if this is correct. Maybe you can correct me. Once, say it was the first or second blow that instantly killed him. So wouldn't the blood stop pumping? Ergo, there wouldn't be as much blood spatter.
no, the blood spatter usually comes afterwards because after the first blow, there's an immediate pooling of blood in that area. Yeah, yes, the heart stops pumping, and but there's this pool of blood that sits there. So every time you hit it, that's when you get the spattering. The first one, you're not going to get this blood spattering on the first whack.
Right,
It's
but I
after
guess
that.
I'm thinking of blood spurting or something from the heart pumping that it shoots out or something. No, you're shaking your
No,
head. It's like
I I would believe that the blood spatter, based on what I believe I've seen, is would have been caused simply by pooling of the blood in the wound area in the
okay.
object, just hitting it and splashing it.
And my second thought, and Shelley, you can correct me if I'm right or wrong, when they took that night or that day when they did the autopsy and they collected the Borden's clothing and put them all down in the basement on a pile to be buried
Yeah.
the next day. His coat wasn't in that pile of clothing and or in the ground. It went missing, right, Shelley?
Yes. And then
I
of course
just
they
don't
would.
think anybody really knew what they were supposed to do. I can't speak for the kinds of training that investigators and police had back in 1892. I, so I don't know whether anybody intentionally tried to do something, but why, you know, there was the most significant downfall of the investigation. It was the lack of chain of custody, the lack of identifying evidence and protecting it. Even the hatchet in I think there were two other instruments they found there. Somebody found it and then they left them there. And they come back the next day or later on, then they finally collected it. Meanwhile, they've got a potential suspect living in the house with the bodies. It was nobody protecting the scene. I mean, the
So,
house was full of people during the whole initial thing.
Oh, I agree with you 100% on that. If they had removed the family and all the bystanders immediately and wrapped a crime scene tape around that place, I don't think we would be sitting here talking today. I think it would
Um,
have been solved.
so let's hold that thought a minute and go to the next photo. This is Abby's photo, thanks to Shelley.
why
And
don't you just tell me what it is? Because I'm frozen again. Otherwise, I'll have to keep doing this. It's up to you.
oh my gosh, um,
Yeah, we're both frozen actually.
I don't know why this keeps happening. So this is Abby's photo, and basically, this is one of Shelley's great. Actually, it's kind of colorized. It's pretty cool. So let's talk about
That,
Abby Borden, and like Shelley, help me here. The question I want to ask is we think that Abby was the intended victim to begin with. Um, sh- we
Well, I think I know where you're going with this. To establish time of death, there's a lot of factors involved. And so we're talking about things like her body weight, the temperature of the room, many other things. Would you agree that she predeceased her husband, and that
Oh
she
yeah.
might have been murdered at least an hour before he was, and maybe even a little longer, perhaps
Yeah,
at 9:30.
even today in 2021, we can't get time of death any better than an hour, hour and a half, unless we have somebody who can testify they saw them alive at a certain time, and then we found another one who found him dead. Other than that, forensically, we can't get any better than an hour and a half. Anyways, of course, on television, we always bring it right down to the minute, which is absurd, totally absurd.
Yeah.
Uh, we can't do that.
Well,
So,
her
you
blood.
know,
And you can
I
see
think
dark.
I think the most significant thing was the stomach contents. That's still used today. I think the stomach contents helped identify the timeline.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. So I'm going to ask the first question to the viewers that are watching us. Every show we do a little trivia, and at the end we give away a gift. So the first question, I know, we're going to ask is, what is the name of the neighbor who came over to help Lizzie when she heard a commotion? She also found the body of Abby along with Bridget Sullivan. And you're just going to write in the name of who it was. Okay. So that's question number one. Who was the neighbor that came over to help when Lizzie heard a commotion, and they also found the body of Abby upstairs? All right. So moving on to our next slide, Kenny. So this is the skull of Andrew, which is a mess, and you can do the next slide too, and of Abby, and then the next one is the hatchet. So, okay, they went off and they come back on. Yeah, that's a quick off and on. Okay, so the hatchet. I want to talk about the hatchet because people get that confused with an axe. So,
Hmm.
Tom, just talk about the hatchet and why they think this is the murder weapon. This came from Fall River. This picture, but it's not the murder weapon. Really, it wasn't the murder weapon.
Well, I don't know if we can even say that. We don't know what the murder weapon is. We don't even know where this came from. There's no chain of custody. This could have been, you know, allegedly it's one of the several objects that was found in the what do you call it, the tinder box or whatever,
Yeah, in the
in
basement.
the basement. That was like hidden in the dust. If is it that or not? We don't know. You
Yeah,
know,
and don't you think it's crazy that that Lizzie would even have the time to go down and break the head off and strategically put it in a box? I mean, if you were a murderer, wouldn't you want to like dispose of the weapon quickly somewhere?
well, yes, I, I agree. Why would she? How would she do that? And why would unless it was full of blood, and that's why she felt it necessary uh, to cut the handle off because they never found the handle.
Well, there
So
was
we
some
don't know how long the handle was not part of that.
Yeah, so Shelley, there was some testimony though about the handle between Fleet and someone else, where the handle was in the box, but then it went missing or something, right?
Yeah, there was a lot of confusion, and it didn't look good for the police department. They sort of looked like Keystone Cops when the testimony came. Well, yes, there was a handle. No, there wasn't a handle. I wrapped it up. I put the head of the hatchet in my pocket, and Marshall Hilliard saw it. It was, as you say, the chain of custody was ridiculous. It was laughable and caused so much confusion. And then the Monday after the Bordens were buried, Officer Medley and Edson go back to the cellar, and that's when they find this piece of the hatchet there in the dust in the cellar, and looked like it had been recently washed with a fresh break, and more confusion. So
So yeah.
collection of evidence was horrific.
Our system of justice is not focused on determining who committed the crime. Our system of justice is based on determining beyond a reasonable doubt whether the state has enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not about whether they did it or not. And there isn't anybody with common sense that doesn't realize O.J. Simpson killed his ex-wife in Ron Goldman, but he was found not guilty. Do I agree with that? I absolutely do, because the evidence wasn't properly presented in a manner that would cause 12 people who weren't smart enough to get out of jury duty to believe beyond a reasonable doubt that O.J. did it. I would believe that all 12 probably thought he did it, but they had to go with the evidence because our system of justice is that way. Now, that doesn't mean you always need, I don't know if you all know Scott Peterson, the one that was found guilty for killing his wife and unborn child. There wasn't one piece of physical evidence that proved he did that, and he was convicted. He was convicted because common sense in circumstantial evidence made one believe that a crime was committed and that he committed the crime, and that is why he was convicted without physical evidence.
Is circumstantial evidence though hearsay? Is that included?
No. Circumstantial evidence is not hearsay. It's just that it's circumstantial evidence. It proves an element of the crime, but not the crime itself. Now, how much circumstantial evidence do you need to believe that a crime was committed and a certain person committed the crime? There's no specific number. It's when a logical and prudent individual believes a crime was committed and that a certain person or persons committed it based on information. Let's forget about the word evidence. Information that they believe is valid and reliable. It doesn't have to be the smoking gun.
Okay. What's the next slide, Kenny?
The dress.
Yeah, the magical dress. So I love this because this is from Shelley's book, and she did like these little cutouts and stuff. This is the Bedford cord, and what's really interesting is this is the only dress in Lizzie's collection that her dressmaker made an extra 1.5 inches on the bottom of the dress, like that little piece. You could rip that off really easily.
The ruffle.
The ruffle, right. And then I always thought a sprig was just a little emblem, but it turns out it was this pattern. So my theory, because she wore the dress after she killed Abby, and she was seen in that dress for 40 minutes. Now, if there was blood spatter on that dress, it would be really hard to detect, especially my theory is if you wore it inside out to do the crime and then turned it back. So all the blood spatter would be on the inside, and then the pattern would kind of cover that up. Thoughts?
The thoughts I would have is I would want to talk to Emma, and she's not around right now, and say, Emma and whoever the other woman was that saw the alleged paint on the dress.
Mrs. Churchill, I believe.
Okay, I would want to know how much did they see? I mean, how much was on there? They saw something. Blood when it's fresh is red, but when it dries, it's a dark maroonish color, and
even brown.
So actually,
brown,
Alice Russell, her next door neighbor, saw the dress that morning, a Sunday morning, when she burned it, and she was ripping it up. So she's the one I think that said she saw paint on the dress before she burned it. And isn't that like a thing of guilt kind of thing?
Absolutely. It's about common sense. The woman's parents just were killed, massacred, and she's worrying about a dress with paint on it. I mean, my goodness.
And it was only the back of the skirt. Why did she burn the top? And why didn't they just tear it up for rags if it was innocent? What you think? Common sense.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, and if we believe some of the testimony that I've seen and heard, she was advised not to destroy anything. Again, I don't know how true that is. Again, even written testimony is not always the truth. You need to understand that. Just because it's written testimony doesn't mean that it's always true. It's just a person's perception and what they said. So it's a difficult thing. We'll never know. And anybody who tries to continually think that there's something there they're gonna be able to find, like when we were going to exhume the bodies, the only thing we were going to be able to do is determine one way or the other whether the hatchet was the murder weapon or not.
Mhm.
All right. So if we decided it was or wasn't, what was that going to prove?
Didn't
It
some
wasn't going to
people
prove Lizzie Borden did it.
was
Borden
it
did it.
was it you and a team of people or something that went into the house at one point, sprayed luminol in the basement up on the ceiling rafters or something?
That was me. That was me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Well, we were looking for just blood. I found we got reactions with luminol in the area where the the hatchet and the other things, that box, whether the box wasn't there, but they told me that's the area where the box was. I sprayed that area with luminol, and I got some interesting reactions. It doesn't mean, you got to remember they were killing chickens in the basement back
this
then.
is true.
You know,
Yeah.
so it didn't have to be human blood. But anyways, for whatever reason, I decided to spray the luminol right underneath where the sofa was, and it was unbelievable. I got this. I mean, it like glowed. I mean, that whole area where the blood would have pooled on the floor, because the rafters, there's space in between the wooden rafters. Anyways, it glowed, which was interesting because no one ever knew how long luminol would react.
Right,
Um,
right.
so I took samples of that, and it was my understanding that it was going to be tested, but it didn't get tested for whatever reason.
Interesting. Yeah.
So you used a black light. Is that what you need to do with luminol? Is it like a
No,
phosphorescent?
no, you don't even know. You just shut the lights off. That's all you need.
And what did you
And
I would
see?
illuminate the whole house. I mean, if you had that back then, I'd be like
well,
spraying.
yeah, um, the you got to remember, and you know, when we did that TV show, we spent 2.5 years, and Tom and I spent a lot of time trying to get the facts and to stay with the facts. But you never know what it is that they're putting together, because you do these different scenes, and we don't see the show until it gets till the premiere. In fact, we never
Right.
even met. We never even met the person who was writing the script. We didn't even know he existed till the end. He never asked us a question.
Yeah, and
So
producers are mostly interested in the effect and
it's about entertainment, and
right.
that's the problem we have with all these shows on television. People think they're being educated when they watch the shows, and they don't understand that Hollywood's interest is entertainment, not not education. If those two conflict, entertainment wins every time. It just does. The idea of the noise was not the way I presented it. you know, Lizzie said that at the time, then we believed that Abby was being murdered. That she said that she was ironing downstairs in the dining room area. Well, I lived in a Victorian house in New England, and I know how you can hear everything when people are walking upstairs. My grandmother used to live upstairs, and I knew exactly where she was at any given time, just from her walking. Now, Abby was not, she wasn't a thin woman. She had some weight to her, to where when she hit the floor, you know, that had to shake the house, in my opinion.
And the
Yeah,
struggle of running, even running, because I'm sure there was some struggle there of her running, trying to get away, and maybe she fell on, like, there had to
I
be.
didn't see any evidence of any running. Um, and not to say it didn't happen, but I didn't see that.
Okay.
Also, if there was someone else who did this, there would have been blood trails from the point where that person was to when they tried to get out of the house. They
That's
never
what I
said they
thought
saw
too.
any blood trails anywhere, to
Right.
my knowledge.
Nothing. Nothing.
Mhm.
Yeah. And Shelley, you have a question?
Yeah, you would agree that where the bodies were found were the spots where they were killed. So nothing
Yes,
was
yes.
dragged in any other room. She was murdered in the guest room. He's murdered on the sofa. The other question I wanted to ask, are you agreeing with the killer of Andrew came through the dining room behind the head of Andrew and attacked from behind his head and not through the kitchen door with a for the front approach to his face?
Correct. I believe from the back
I
in the
agree with
dining room.
you. But some don't. Some people think. I think he'd be taking a chance that he would sent someone and maybe open his eyes and could have, as you say, thrown his hands up. It would be better to sneak up behind his head, I think. So I agree with you on that one.
Yeah. One
So,
of the things that I think is really interesting too, and was Lizzie said she was in the barn upstairs. Why would anybody be upstairs in a hot barn eating pears? I mean, that just doesn't even make sense. And the other thing was that the officer, interestingly enough, allegedly made the observation that there were no footprints on the residue on the floor. Now, I don't know how valid that is, but it certainly, I've read that on several things, including some of the testimony in court, that there was no footprints in the residue upstairs in that area.
well, a
Well,
few of those officers got big fat promotions too after the
well,
case.
Officer Medley is the guy that put his hands down on the hayloft floor.
Yeah.
And he went on to become Fall River's first chief of police. He and Harrington were my two favorites on the day because they were thinking outside of the box. They were
Mm-hmm.
years ahead of some of the others, I think.
So
Medley.
I'm going to ask the second question to our viewers. Okay, so what day did the trial start? Simply, what day did the trial start? Was it A, June 20th, 1893? Was it B, June 5th, 1893? Or C, October 13th, 1892? What day did the trial start? Okay, so Kenny, we're going to show the next slide, and I think it's the checklist slide.
Okay, I'm gonna go out and come back in
Okay,
again.
sure.
Hold on.
What's that? Oh, okay. So we're going to bring up the checklist slide.
Okay.
Okay, so before we start this, I just want viewers to know what this is, Tom. So explain this to us because this is your baby.
Absolutely. Well, 4 years ago, being frustrated working for defense attorneys and looking and examining criminal investigations from the crime scene to the crime lab and seeing all the things that were being missed by investigators today. I mean, in this time period, and being in teaching police officers and criminal justice students at Maryland for 44 years, I was frustrated that things were being missed. It wasn't necessarily that they didn't know what to do; they weren't doing it in a consistent manner. So the idea of a checklist became important. Pilots use it. Pilot will not fly a jet until they go through a checklist of things to ensure that they don't miss anything. In hospitals, the medical profession now, before a person is being operated, they go through a checklist to make sure that they don't miss anything. So I decided there was no such thing for the criminal justice community, so I created a CSI checklist. Now, we have standards. There have been standards written nationally by the Department of Justice on how to conduct various types of investigations, from the crime scene, homicides, burglaries, all these various type crimes, sex crimes, etc. There are basic standards of what need to be done, what evidence to be looking for, what questions to be asked, what observations to make. And the bottom line is, if it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you have never conducted a rape investigation and you learned about, you got that training 10 years ago, it's not going to help you at 3 o'clock in the morning. But now all you have to do, if you have my app, is go to the app and just go to sex crimes, and it'll give you a checklist of various things that need to be done, questions that need to be asked. So I was really happy, Kimbra, when you suggested to use the checklist on the Lizzie Borden case. Now, what I did is I did it the opposite. I went through the checklist on preliminary investigation, crime scene investigation, and death investigation, and I checked off all the things that weren't done during the, to my knowledge. And after you've checked off all the various things, it will create a report, and you're looking at the report I created for the Lizzie Borden double murder case, and you can email it to you, or message it, text it to yourself, to your supervisor. So when you're writing your report, another thing, when you're writing your report, if you did something but you didn't put it in the report, 6 months, 8 months later, or a year later, when you go to trial, if it's not in that report, you didn't do it. And if you try to say you did it, then now you're causing a problem with the opposition attorney, who's going to try to make it look like that you're not telling the truth. So this helps you, one, not make mistakes, two, create a report without missing anything, and giving it to your supervisor, so your supervisor can make sure that you've done what needs to be done. So that's what this document is.
So, Kenny, scroll up a little bit. Crime scene procedures. So, are these the things that they didn't do? Like, one's declare location.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to declare the location of crime scene so people know what needs to be protected. And I did a homicide case several years ago in Maryland, where the spouse got arrested for first-degree murder of her husband, and they thought he just died through natural causes at the beginning. Later on, they decided that she did it, and they arrested her. So at no time did they create a crime scene. They had people going in and out of the house, and it just was crazy, And
well, it's the same kind of thing with the Lizzie Borden case. They had people in the house from Thursday to Sunday.
Absolutely, it was a social event. It was a social event.
And there were not like a few. There were hundreds, right, Shelley? There were like hundreds.
Even Mr. Petty, who had lived there before, they let him in to walk around, and anybody off the street. And the crime scene must have been contaminated. Lizzie was left alone doing who knows what.
Yeah, because they didn't remove all non-essential personnel from the scene. They didn't document body positions. They did do a little on appearance, but they did the autopsy in the first one in the house. That to me is insane.
They did it allegedly on the dining room table. Now, why would they do that? Well, I mean, what? Just imagine. You gotta have to imagine that. Here's Lizzie. She was suspected of being involved fairly quickly.
Yeah.
She's in the house. The body, I mean, it's August, long before air conditioning. I can't imagine why those bodies stayed there and why they would have done the autopsy there. But again, 1892,
And what was really sad, and I thought, well, not sad, but just like gross, was when they did the autopsy, they put them in jars and they lined up everything in the kitchen on a table for Bridget Sullivan to pass. Like, she must have saw the worst of the worst that whole day, because she was the one leading the police around to find the hatchets. And then, the doctors would present these things on the table, and she was passing by them looking at these jars all day long. And it's no wonder that night, Thursday night, she wanted to leave the house. Like, she didn't want to stay there. I mean, any normal person would be like horrified.
Why would anybody, any family member, want to be in that house that night? Why would,
Exactly.
think
True.
about it. Why would they? Uh,
But Alice
There's
Russell
plenty of places.
stayed with Lizzie that night too, and I don't get that, Shelley, because the night before, Lizzie poured her guts out to Alice on her premonition,
Something's
pre.
going to happen.
Uh,
But at the time in the era, it was not unusual to have a close friend of the family come stay and help while the funeral was being prepared. And that person might have been a relative or just a close friend would help with the preparation. Um, and so the fact that Alice was asked to stay and help them and be there isn't unusual for the time. And funeral homes not being a thing of the time either. The fact that they were laid out at home is not particularly odd for 1892. Why they did the partial removal of the stomach and sort of a hasty little autopsy, um,
so,
that was a little.
Tom, take me through the steps. If you were there that day, you were the first cop in there. Like, wouldn't you have had someone rope off the scene first of all? But then what?
Everybody would have been removed. The bodies would have been kept there. You don't want to move the bodies. You want to examine the crime scene with the bodies there. We still have that problem today. Ambulance crews are always being called when there's a body, and they always want to try to resuscitate them, which is fine. But if they're dead, they're dead. There's nothing you can do. And they
Right.
want to transport all the time. And we have to tell them, don't transport. The body needs to stay there. So, yeah, I would have removed everybody. I would have secured the area. And then one of the things that was confusing is who was in charge? Who was the principal investigator? There wasn't any one person. It appeared there wasn't any one person who was in charge. And when that
Right.
happens, it
Right.
becomes a political football.
Yeah, and also they had moved the bodies at least 2 or 3 times. Dr. Bowen had turned Abby over, so when Walsh got there to photograph the crime scene, it had been tampered with. They went through Andrew Borden's vest to see if burglary was a motive, so he had been moved at least one time. So the crime scene photos aren't accurate that this is how the body was found because each one had been moved.
Well, I think they fixed Abby because her dress was up and they didn't want to expose her butt. It was
Yeah.
improper, kind of. But I have a question from one of the viewers who asked, "Do you think Bridget knew more than she let on in the trial? Like Bridget claimed to know nothing."
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know.
That's the maid.
It's possible. Obviously she needed to protect herself. But again, was she upstairs really resting? Was she really sick, or did she see more or whatever? She was afraid. If she did know more, she certainly was afraid to say anything.
I'd like to say something. I'd like to comment on that. A lot of people believe that Abby and Bridget weren't really friends, or but Abby actually paid Bridget to, like, some extra money in her salary to stay in the house as a buffer between Abby and the girls, Lizzie and Emma, because they were always arguing, supposedly. So Bridget had at one point had enough and wanted to leave, and Abby said, "Oh, no, I'll give you a little extra money to stay." So I don't think that Bridget really had anything to do with this murder. I think it was all Lizzie.
Well, I don't think she had anything to do with it. I think she just might have seen something that she was afraid to say. That's all.
Well, and they said she was paid off, but I don't think she was paid off because there's no evidence of that either, right, Shelley?
Nothing to be proven concretely, no. She had a nice dress for the trial, but who knows?
So
one of the things I wanted to bring up is when they decapitated the heads to bring to trial. I liken that to the O.J. Simpson case in the glove, in trying to put the gloves on. You know, if it doesn't fit, you must have quit. And it appears that the reason why they decapitated the heads and brought them in is they wanted to show the jury, the trauma that was done, and it kind of turned on them because allegedly they felt that no woman could have done that kind of damage. I believe any person with enough rage could have done that damage, whether it be a man,
and
woman, or whatever.
it was a small hatchet. It wasn't like it was a big axe. It was a little handheld hatchet that, Shelley, I think you even did an experiment with that type of hatchet that you could
Yeah,
hold it and
I have
easily.
done an experiment. And if you have a good sharp blade, it's a very handy tool for a woman. It isn't terribly, and you can get some real momentum. An axe would have hit the back door, the door into the parlor, and they did find 60 drops of blood, I think, on that Emma wiped off. And they found, I think, 40 some on the picture over the sofa, and then on the wallpaper, which was sort of in an arc about 5 inches above his head. But no, there was talk of a flat iron. And if you try the experiment with a flat iron, it's very unwieldy and it's more of a blunt instrument. It
Right.
crushes bone. But to get a sharp cut to bisect the eye like that, I would think, Professor, I don't know if you'd agree, it would have to be something like a sharp edge tool.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
yes, like a hatchet or a short handled axe to get those
Hmm.
kinds of wounds, and not a candlestick or a flat iron. And
Well,
I
in a
practice.
short handled axe is a hatchet, is it not? Isn't it? I thought basically a hatchet is simply uh, um,
Mhm.
a, um, a short handled. An axe and
Yeah,
a hatchet look alike. They just, one's bigger than the other. One has a longer handle.
yeah.
That's right. It's very similar.
All right.
So I'm on board with the hatchet too. I think that was the murder weapon.
So, question number 3 for our viewers. Question number 3 is, um, okay,
While
what?
you're doing that, I'm going to get out and come back in again.
Okay, okay. What other crime was Lizzie Borden suspected of after she was found guilty of the murder of her parents? What other crime was Lizzie suspected of after she was found not guilty of the murder of her parents? And this is not a multiple choice. You should write this in. It's what other crime was Lizzie suspected of? Okay, so didn't Bridget actually have something to say on her deathbed, but she got better and never said what she wanted to say?
That was the story.
Yeah,
Yes. Uh,
that was a story. I want to ask about the bloody rags in the pail in the basement, which that always intrigued me because Lizzie always said it was her time of month, and of course, men back in that time period weren't going to discuss menstruation, and even in the trial, they sort of skated around that whole theory of they didn't want to talk about it. But I
Hmm.
think it's significant because that could have, in my opinion, been rags used to clean up Abby's blood or blood off of somewhere and just thrown in there because there was a discrepancy of when they were put there. Lizzie said, "Oh no, it was a few days," and Bridget said, "No, they were just put here today."
yes,
Hmm.
she had done the wash and didn't remember seeing that pail when she had done the wash at
Right.
the beginning of the week.
And
And
if we
Lizzie's,
had like DNA testing, we would have known right away what that pail contained.
Well, if things were done right, it would have been collected, and each piece would have been taken out to identify exactly what it was. And
so,
we wouldn't be questioning what it was today.
Right.
right, menstrual blood would be different than blood from something else. You could tell menstrual blood from
Well, plus it would be on something different than you know.
towelette.
Yeah. whatever they used back then.
Yeah.
Okay,
They were
so we have our tea expert on. We're going to bring her on, and she's going to mix us a special forensic tea tonight. It's in your honor, Tom.
Hi,
Oh, thank
everyone.
you.
Can you hear me? I'm trying a new headset, so I'm not echoey. Can you hear me
Yeah.
fine?
Yeah, you sound
Yeah.
good,
Woohoo!
Rena. This is
All right.
Rena.
Hi, so nice to see you. Nice to see you again. Thanks for having me, and nice to meet you, Tom. So tonight I'm making a sort of non-traditional tea drink. I'm using a fruit tea, which is not something that was common during Lizzie's time. Herbal teas were actually popular in the United States, but fruit teas are something that is, well, they're not technically teas. They're considered tisanes or infusions. But we're going to make a summertime drink, and it's one that Lizzie probably would not have had because it's made with alcohol. And am I mistaken? Wasn't she part of the women's temperance movement?
Yeah.
So I'm also going to make a non-alcoholic tea drink, something that she might enjoy. But tonight's drink is called Down the Hatchet in honor of our special guest. So what I'm using tonight is strawberry lime daiquiri tea infused gin. So this is a variation on a gin and tonic, and I am using gunpowder Irish gin for it. And in fact, I will show you how I make this in a moment, but I thought I would make the final drink and then show you how it's put together. So I have my glass and my ice. I am going to be taking my 1 ounce. You could do 2 if you want to do a double shot, but generally 1 ounce is 1 shot of alcohol because this is pure gin with tea infused. And I'm going to add it. I'm making 2 because I promised my husband I'd make him 1 too. Gin and tonic is his favorite summer drink. So we have our 1 ounce of our drink, and now to add some tonic to it, I'm using Schweppes, nothing fancy, just a regular tonic. And it's perfect. This is the perfect amount for 2 drinks. Add a little bit of lime. You can squeeze it into the drink, or you can put it right on the rim of the glass to be fancy. And that is, in fact, all you need to make this drink. So here is our Down the Hatchet drink, and here it is, Down the Hatchet.
That's great.
And
you
if
know
you
what?
wanted to add a little more strawberry lime daiquiri flavor, you can just add some of the iced tea itself, which I will also show you how to make. So how to make this, how to make any alcohol infusion. And you can use any tea to do this. It can be black tea, it can be green tea, it can be fruit tea, herbal teas. What you need is you take your alcohol. So as I mentioned, I was using my gunpowder Irish gin, which happens to be actually a gin made with green tea, which is why I thought it would fit very well. And I poured, this is actually water. I'm not doing another thing of gin right now, but this is water, but it works with any cold liquid. You can cold steep tea in any liquid. And so with my water, which was gin, I take a steeping sack. These are basically make your own tea bags. They are biodegradable, which is really nice. And unlike a cup of tea that you would normally make, where you would use 1 teaspoon or 1.5 teaspoons of tea for a cup, when you're cold steeping, you double it. So I'm taking my tea, which I happen to have in a tea tin. You can see I put my directions on there. The directions, I don't know if you can see that. 1.5 teaspoons, 4 to 5 minutes, 1 time. The directions are actually listed on the back of every single bag of tea. So I just transfer it to my container. I'm going to take 2 scoops of it instead of 1. And I will show you the tea because the fruit tea is super neat to look at. It is, wow. You can see the pieces of fruit. You can actually eat this. You could just eat it. And I'm going to take 2 scoops and put it right into my steeping sack. And I'm almost out of this tea. This has been my obsession tea, as the weather has gotten warmer. Stick it right into your cold liquid of choice, whether it be gin, vodka, lemonade, and you let it sit for a minimum of 2 hours. If you're doing lemonade or a fizzy beverage, you would let it sit for about 15 minutes. If it's fizzy, you want to stop it then. If it's just lemonade, uh-oh, I froze. Did I freeze for you?
No, you're still here.
Oh, great. I just froze on my screen. So you would let it steep for 15 minutes to 2 hours, but for Alcohol, I'd say 2 hours minimum, and then let it steep for overnight. You cannot overbrew it. So I'm obviously not going to let that steep all the way through, but that is how you make any sort of alcohol infusion. And you could see it picks up a lovely color. It smells really great because it smells like the tea. And so you have, without any added calories or any added sugars or anything added, you have delicious flavored alcohol. And this is in one of our brew and serve bottles, which is kind of neat. They look like little milk bottles. And so I really like that. Now, for the non-alcohol drinkers, such as Lizzie, I thought that a strawberry lime daiquiri lemonade would make a little more sense. So here's my little double bubble glass with ice. The way that you make a pitcher of iced tea, you can do the cold steeping method, which means that instead of 1 pot of tea scoop, you would use 2. This is about 3.5 teaspoons, so it would be about 7 teaspoons. And you put it into the infuser that's in the center and just fill it up with cold water and stick it in the fridge overnight. If you want to brew tea that is very strong right away, you can do a pot of boiling water and add it to the tea, let it sit for about 10 minutes, and then fill the rest with cold water and ice, and you're good to go. So those are 2 different ways that you can do it. So I'm gonna fill my glass about 2/3 of the way with my beverage, and then add some lemonade to the top because it tastes delicious together.
I want to come over to your house right now.
It is going to be delicious. We haven't had dinner yet, and my husband is very excited for our beverages. So this is a alcohol-free, delicious treat.
Tom, that looks like a nice drink for on the beach.
Oh, so good.
Yes.
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 And it's
So
called
those were my Down the Hatchet. And I'm not sure if we can have an alcohol-free, just call it Lizzie's version of Down the Hatchet for our strawberry lime daiquiri lemonade, which
That's awesome.
anytime. The other great thing is these are all caffeine-free, so that's why I thought it was a good drink to make in the evening time because fruit has no caffeine.
Just a quick question: the fruit
Mhm.
tea, is that what it is called?
Yeah.
Fruit tea.
Fruit tea. Here's
you can-
one of my favorites.
Oh wow!
Right
okay.
here. So fruit tea, and the back tells you what kind. This is raspberry cosmopolitan.
Oh, okay.
Sipology is really neat that they've specifically designed a lot of their teas to go with alcohol because they know their clientele, and so they're great with water, but they're also great brewed in or mixed with alcohol. And so this is the one I usually use in vodka with ginger ale or with a strawberry lemonade if I
Nice.
wanted something different. So
I'm
My
making.
favorite drink is a Long Island iced tea, which is a little
we
bit
can make
different.
those too.
I guess
We
they
can
go
make
along
those
the beach
too
also,
with
yeah.
real tea.
Yeah. So, Rena, I put you on my new. Okay, so I'll just tell you right now. Tonight I'm launching Lizzie Borden Shop, the LizzieBordenShop.com. And I recruited different artists to do their interpretation of some Lizzie Borden things. I started a line of trading cards, like ball trading cards, but the Lizzie Borden trading cards. And every few months, we'll come out with a few more. They're on the site right now. And note cards. We have a Lizzie Borden cutting board. Some different fun items related to the Borden crimes. And I'm launching that tonight. And I put your Spotify on, or your Sipology actually on there. Oh, look, you brought it
Thank
up.
you.
So this is the Lizzie Borden shop that I'm launching tonight. There's some of the trading cards. And if you scan on the back of them, they have the facts about, and then if you scroll down at the bottom, now, these artists are working very hard. This is all original artwork. I even have like a stained glass hatchet with a little kitty cat. Stained glass, beautiful. I have a woman who does stained glass. She's amazing. I have a black magic mug that's all black, but when you pour hot tea in it, for instance, it comes up with, well, this one we have is a hand holding a hatchet. So every other month there'll be new, like, unique items added to this shop, which these artists, all original artwork that I recruited to do this, and we have so much fun with it. So you're actually on the artist things. I'm putting people on. Shelley, I'm going to put you on to your warps and whelps. Is that the
Reps.
webs? Thank you. And you find links to where you can go for the artwork and like your things. I love the Sipology. It's really great. And
Thanks.
Tom, your CSI checkbook or checklist
List.
is amazing. I just think that's such the coolest idea, and I think it comes in. Have you had? You recently launched that. Have you had success with that? Like, are you selling a lot of them? The
Uh,
apps?
it's slow, but part of the reason is because all the conferences were canceled. So they're just starting up. So I'm going to several live conferences in the next couple of months, and I'm hoping to get it moving. So you know, at first, police chiefs said, "Hey, that's a great idea," but our people got training. They don't need anything like this because they know what to do. And I said, it's not a question of knowing what to do. It's not forgetting what to do. It's a different
Right,
thing.
right.
And having consistency. So it doesn't matter how much training or how many years you have in the business, everybody will do the same thing. So I'm hoping it's going to take off.
Yeah, I wish you
We'll
a lot
see.
of success with that. If we can help you in
Thank you.
any way, let us know.
All right. Well, I
So
appreciate it.
I'm going to ask another question to the Lizzie Borden folks. Okay, so Tom, you might be interested in this question.
Uh-uh.
So how many counts of murder was Lizzie charged with? Was it 1 count, 2 counts, or 3 counts? And you can think about that one. And I'll give you the
Obviously,
last question, and then we'll come back to this at the very end and answer them. So the last question is, who was Lizzie's principal attorney during the trial? Was it A, Jose Knowlton, B, George Robinson, or C, William Moody? So there's no right or wrong answer for the folks watching this. If you answer it, just answer it. You'll be thrown in our jar we're giving away 2 trading cards tonight from our Lizzie Borden shop. So they will be mailed to you. So, Rena, thank you so much. I'll be right over after the show.
Sure. And you can find more recipes and stuff on my Facebook page. If you have Facebook, you could go to Rena's Tea House.
Right, and Rena is
check me
great
out
for
there.
answering any questions. Like, she'll take time out to explain it to you if you have questions about the caffeine and like content or any of that kind of thing. So, thank you, Rena. I will talk to you later.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
nice meeting you.
So
Nice to meet you.
she's great. She's my tea person, or our tea person now, right, Shelley?
Yes.
So let's talk about the night before, Tom, and I want to talk about like motive and premeditated type of thing, because she did visit Alice Russell the night before and kind of spilled her guts saying, "Oh, I feel like I need to sleep with one eye open, and somebody's after father." And she went through actually a list of things about how they thought they were poisoned. She said everything to Alice Russell: the poisoning, someone coming after her father. What else, Shelley? There was like a list of things. Somebody did something to the milk in the bread.
And Alice said, well, they'd be seen tampering with the milk because daylight when the milk came. Also, she mentioned that she'd seen a man slink around the shrubbery by the house one night when she was coming home from a function, and that her father had an enemy, and they could burn the house down over their head. Uh, really gloom and doom.
There was like
Alice, of course, tried to smooth her over, but
there was like a
the
list of there
Mhm.
was like a list of everything she could think of in order to kill the Bordens.
Right. She ticked all the boxes of what might happen.
So you've been a police officer for a long time, Tom, and also what I found really interesting in your bio, which I want to come over to your house one day and set it up. And you worked with polygraphing, right? For
Oh yes.
counterintelligence and all kinds of people.
Yeah. I've conducted about 1,200 myself.
Yeah.
I was chief of polygraph for my federal job for 3 years, 4 years. We're doing 10,000 polygraphs a year.
Wow. Wouldn't it have been interesting to put Lizzie on a polygraph? I mean,
Well,
imagine
maybe,
that.
again, she'd have to know and understand if she was guilty, if she had done it, she would have to know and understand that she was doing that. I mean, again, not being a psychologist, um, the polygraph only works if you feel a threat, and because all the polygraph does is record your sympathetic nervous system, the same sympathetic nervous system that causes that instantaneous rigor that I was talking about.
Yeah.
When you perceive a threat, your body changes, and all the polygraph does is measure those changes. It doesn't detect lies. There's no such instrument that detects lies. It detects changes in your body are that are activated when you perceive a threat. So if she knew what she had done and perceived, and it was asked in a polygraph, which didn't even exist back then in
Right.
1892, but then the polygraph would have seen that. On the other hand, if she had no understanding of what she had done, if that was possible,
So
then
what do you think her motive was then? Because they always say you need a
you know,
motive.
I just really think the motive was that she really didn't like the way she was living. She wanted to be different. It appeared that she was somewhat spoiled. She didn't have a job. Didn't need to have a job. She went. Her parents, her father sent her to Europe for a while, um, and she wanted the finer things of life, and she wasn't getting them. And she was convinced. I think she was convinced that her father was gonna that all the father's money was going to go to Abby if she didn't do something about it. That's why Abby was killed first and not second.
Do
And
you, do you think there are any other suspects? Because a lot of people thought that John Morris might have had something, or there was a conspiracy going on, or do you think it was solely, or even her sister Emma maybe knew that maybe they were going to do something, that it was going to happen, but she, because there was one thing that bothered me, and it was when Emma was away, her father, Andrew, sent, I think, a message to Emma saying, or before Emma left, maybe, are you available just in case anything happens? There was one line. I don't know, Shelley, if you picked that up. I have to send it to you. But
Yeah, it's hard to know, the documentation on that or what was meant by it in hindsight,
yeah.
if anything would happen.
So,
if Lizzie Borden was found guilty, would we be having this discussion tonight?
No,
well, we wouldn't even be care. There
no.
would be, you know what I'm saying? There
Right.
would be no
That's right.
intrigue, because just like, say, Jack the Ripper, oh, we're so excited about it, because it's unsolved. Though I still
Mhm.
am intrigued with OJ, because I still think it's unsolved, even though the outcome was what it was.
I
Mhm.
wanted to ask a question. We talked about polygraph. I've been asked many times about fingerprint evidence. And can you clarify in 1892 what the status of fingerprinting was as evidence? I wouldn't think there was any records or.
No, fingerprints has been around for hundreds of years as a form of identification, but it wasn't used in criminal matters back then. You know, in fact, when they initially called them finger marks. Excuse my Boston accent. Uh, um, but to my understanding, there was no use of fingerprints. But in I don't remember in my research any discussion at all of any looking at fingerprints. So I believe it was after 1900 that we started using them. And when we first used them, they were only good if you had a suspect. In other words, you couldn't find a latent print at a crime scene and find out if that person had ever been arrested, and that those prints would be on file. That's only been in the last 25 years or so, 30 years,
And
that we can do that.
Also dispel the notion that grew out of the Ripper case in 1888 that the last thing a victim saw would be imprinted on their retina. I understand that was something that was tossed around. That and you can put paid to that, I'm sure.
I think that's absurd, but I don't know. I can't speak on that. I wouldn't know.
So, what about the prussic acid? That whole thing. So, there was one of our viewers asked about, do you think, basically, did Lizzie try to poison them before the fact? And
Well, he didn't. Well, I mean, she tried to get poison, and she didn't get it. They didn't sell it to her. Yeah, and the reason during the inquest, when she denied even being in the drugstore, unfortunately, that wasn't able to be used because she wasn't advised that she didn't have to incriminate herself during the inquest, because she was told by the mayor of the town that she was a suspect. She should have been advised that she did not have to testify during the inquest, and that was why all that information wasn't allowed to be used in the trial. The Miranda warnings that we know of today, that Supreme Court decision didn't happen until 1966.
Wow.
But those rights were always with us. We always had the right to remain silent, and anything we said could be used against us in a court of law. And but it wasn't until 1966 that the Supreme Court made the decision that people had to be advised even before you even question them.
So today, I mean, there are so many things that we could have used as tools to solve this case. As far as fingerprinting, DNA, even the spray, luminol, blocking off the crime scene, taking people out, separating them, taking different statements, and not allowing them to be together for days. Just a whole bunch of things that weren't done back then. So let me ask you this. Has a lot changed since then as far as the way people go into a crime scene and handle it? Because we always hear of discrepancies all the time. Have we gotten better at it?
We've gotten better at it. There's over 19,000 police departments in this country. Okay. And there's a lot of small police departments that don't regularly do, serious crimes like homicides and rapes, etc. And they're not used to it. I mean, I worked on a homicide case a few years ago, a 2.5-year-old little girl in New York. Now, when you hear New York, you think of New York City, but this was a small sheriff's department that didn't do all the basic principles that wasn't done in 1892. And I testified in the trial, and the prosecutor said to me, "Well, Professor Mauriello, it sounds like all you're doing is Monday morning quarterbacking." I said, "Well, this is not a football game. This is about the death of a 2.5-year-old child and the life of a defendant. I wasn't questioning whether they did it right or did it. I was saying they didn't do it at all. They were basic standards and principles that weren't done. Why? Because this particular department generally didn't handle homicides. The only reason why they handled this one was because they thought the little girl fell from her upper bed, and they thought it was an accident. It wasn't until later on that they believed it wasn't an accident, and they decided to charge the the mother's boyfriend. And because they started the investigation, they held on to it. And I think that was, well, they still got a conviction. So I guess we can't say that it wasn't all bad,
Yeah.
but certainly they did, they missed a lot of the things that were missed in 1892. So is it better? Of course it's better. We have technology now that we didn't have before. But you gotta simply do those things. If you do the basic things, what the uniform officer is probably the most important one. What he or she does or doesn't do at the very beginning really affects the outcome of the case. Their job is to stop time. They're the first ones at the scene that represents, the criminal justice process. And their job is to, keep people there, identify people, not let them, protect the crime scene and get the right players to come. For example, the coroner, the police are not even allowed to touch the body or go in the pockets. The body is the 100% jurisdiction of the coroner or the medical examiner. By the way, we have two different systems in this country. Coroners and medical examiners, they're two different kinds of people, unfortunately. But the police, their job is to take the lead after the medical examiner. When they say it's a crime, a homicide, then the police conduct an investigation. If it's an accident, the police aren't involved at all. Accidents usually are civil cases where the investigators from the insurance companies are the ones that do the investigation.
Yeah. So, Shelley, do you have anything? I've been watching our viewers and catching their questions. I don't know. Do you have anything more on your list of questions? I could talk for hours. I mean, this could veer off not even the Lizzie Borden case, but just police procedures.
Alone, yeah. Yeah, I wondered, Uncle John had to pay someone to bury the clothing that was in the cellar behind the barn. And I do know he was told, and people there in general, not to bother those, to leave them in the cellar. But because there was, I guess, some brain matter from Abby Borden and bits of the cranium, I guess he felt they ought to be buried. Now, you think that was destroying essential evidence by burying that? They had to dig it up. Then police brought it back instead of retaining it. They buried it again. Sounds like a box.
Well, certainly it destroyed evidence, but I wouldn't be blaming John, the uncle. I'd be blaming the police for allowing that to be out of their control.
Right, to be in the
and a lot
cellar.
of things went missing too in this trial. Like the murder weapon, for one, I don't think they've ever found. At one point I suspected that there was a hatchet on top of the crow's roof, the neighbor's roof, that was up on the roof that sort of matched the murder weapon, and there was a talk of what's it called, gilt, that shiny metal kind of thing, which you find on a new tool. And they found evidence of that in Abby's head, but not in Andrew's. And so there was a theory that, there may have been two murder weapons, but I always thought it was one. And even if there was guilt on that, it could have rubbed off by the time she killed Andrew, and then there was none on his head. But
I can't imagine them even looking for it personally.
Well, they found it though. I mean, it was written in some report that they found that shiny metal, saying that it was a new hatchet that was used. But yeah. So I'm trying to think. So your feeling is that she was definitely guilty. I feel that, oh come on, she did it too. I feel that. And I've written a lot about women back then, and a motive of a woman and living in a patriarchal society, because we always talk about motive. I sort of looked at her surroundings and the time period that she lived in as a woman, living in that patriarchal household, and feeling like repressed and oppressed and pushed down. That because she was involved with a lot of different clubs like the women's temperance movement, and that's significant, for women's rights. She was involved with that, and so was her mother, Sarah. If you look at her mother, was involved with clubs like that too, of women's rights. There was another one where they took care of women that were alone, trying to find money for housing, and also in that time period, men ruled. They were in charge of everything. A woman had to ask for everything. They didn't work. They were homemakers, and if they stepped out of line or if they got a little weird, they could be put in an asylum. And a lot of women were thrown in asylums back then too. So if Lizzie was a
But there weren't a
well,
lot. There weren't a lot of women that were killing people. Like,
well, that's not true because Tom, I'm going to give you a copy of my book. I'll mail it to you. It's Women, Lizzie Borden, the case of Lizzie Borden and other murderous women. There were a lot of women back then killing men through not necessarily hatchets, but with poison. Um, I I researched it, and a lot of them were found in these homes where men, were like telling them what to do and living in this oppression of. I mean, like one woman, even in Fall River, was an alcoholic, and she suffered from that, and she threw her 6-month-old baby out a 2-story window after she beat him. I mean, murders like that, women murdered, and Shelley, she was researching murders women also, and has a slew she could tell you about. I mean, in my book alone, there's probably about 15 other women of the same time period that murdered men, and usually they were in the household, the same household.
I look forward to reading that.
Yes, I can't wait till you do. And a lot of and that's what Shelley and I sort of connected because we're fascinated with it. Back in that time period, it was
Yeah,
crazy.
and often it was postpartum depression
Yes.
misdiagnosed, and the gynecologists and such were all men, and it was called melancholia. And a lot of these women just had a baby every year. And
Right next door to the Borden house was another Borden lady, not by biologically, but by marriage. And it's the Well story. Shelley wrote about it, put it on her website. Fascinating.
Mm.
And basically, what happened to her? She had 3 children, and thank you, David. She threw her children in a well, a cistern, it was called back then, down in the
that's right.
basement. And then she slashed her own throat, and it was due to postpartum depression.
Yeah.
So, things like that happen a lot back then. And the only way we're learning about is because a lot of it was written in trial transcripts because all the women in my book were tried and acquitted because men didn't want to send them to the gallows. They didn't want to hang Lizzie Borden. So they went in. They didn't even really talk. Hey, we're going out fishing next, and they came back and said not guilty, because they just didn't want to do it. It wasn't. They were sort of felt like they're the knight in shining armor. They wanted to be, you know,
Rescue the maiden in
the
distress.
yes.
Huh,
So there's a whole
interesting.
psychological theory built around a reason why Lizzie, would have committed murder also, and that's my take on
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, you'll
Interesting.
have to give me your address, Tom. I'd love you to read my book and then you let me know what you think.
Great. The last one, Stephanie Corney
Corey,
asked me
Stephanie
to,
Corey, yeah.
to read this book. She
Oh,
didn't tell me it was 769
yes.
pages,
Uh-huh.
yeah,
but I got to tell you, William Spencer wrote it, and I read every page of it,
I
and
read that one, yeah.
I thought it was well done because it's, he went, you know what was interesting? He didn't tell the reader whether he thought Lizzie Borden did it to the very end.
Right.
He was providing information from the transcripts, all factual data, like a journalist should do. Not that he's a journalist, but he's an author. And then at the very end, it was interesting because I kept saying throughout the read, I wonder if he thinks she did it or not. But he didn't say it. He just provided the data, and then at the end, and allegedly he's going to write another volume of this. I don't know. I mean, there's already 760 pages here. So.
Well, you'll be happy to know mine's only 400.
Oh, good. Oh, 400. Okay, I can do that. I look forward to it.
And what's great, it's different stories. It's not all about Lizzie, but well, Shelley read it, and they all sort of correlate together. And
Women. Yes.
yeah, and we got to talking about many types of murderous women. Then it's like just you can't believe like the stories. But anyway, we are going to answer our questions real quick and then draw some names and then we'll be off. So
Alrighty.
The first question was, what is the name of the neighbor who came over to help Lizzie when she heard a commotion? And it was, is it Miss Churchill? Was she married then?
She was a widow.
She was a widow. So Miss Churchill.
Mrs. Churchill.
Yes. Okay. So what day did the trial start, Shelley?
What were the choices?
June 20th, 1893, June 5th, 1893, or October 13th?
June 5th.
June 5th, you're right. And it ended June 20th.
Right.
So I think it was 14 days, the trial.
Yeah, just about 2 weeks.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what other crime did Lizzie Borden, what was she suspected of after the trial?
Kleptomania?
Theft.
Well, I know there's one documented Tilden and Thurber. She
was charged with stealing 2 paintings from the Tide and Thurber store in Fall River. That's the case.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There's no rumor that she had done it before, but the only documented one was that one you're speaking of.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they suspected her of being a kleptomaniac too. Yeah. So, how many counts of murder was Lizzie charged with, Tom?
Well, obviously you would say 2, but obviously that can't be the right answer. You wouldn't be asking the question.
Right.
Yeah, it's 3.
Right. What's the third? And what's the third one?
She was charged with murder of Andrew Borden, the murder of Abby Borden, and the murder of them both.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's interesting,
isn't it?
It's fascinating, right? But it's the truth. It's in the trial transcripts. So, who was Lizzie's principal attorney at the trial? Jose Knowlton, George Robinson, or William Moody?
Who's that for?
Oh, Shelley, go ahead.
Oh, George Dexter Robinson.
Yes. Yes.
The lead attorney.
And George Robinson and Andrew Jennings defended the Lizzie Borden in the trial, and he actually became governor of Massachusetts after that.
Wasn't he the governor before?
Oh, yes, he was governor before.
Oh, former governor, right. Thank you, former governor, correct.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we got everybody's name here. We're going to draw 2 names for our, we like gimmicks. We're going to draw 2 names for our trading cards. And the first name is, Michael. And how do you spell your last name? Let's see, Michael. Yeah, it starts with a T. T-E-L. Glue. I'm sorry, I'm really botching up your last name, but I have it, so I'll message you. And our second one, the last name is Walker. Joanne Walker, Giovanni. All right,
Yes.
so you guys get your trading cards on. Very excited.
Can I
All right.
mention something about trading cards?
Yes.
That's interesting. But the state of Rhode Island has created a set of trading cards of all the people missing or unsolved murders in the state of Rhode Island, and they removed all the playing cards in all the prisons in Rhode Island, and the only playing cards that the prisoners can use are those cards. So they're they're hoping to get some information from people who might know something. I thought that was
That
kind of cool.
that's amazing.
The assistant medical examiner for the state of Rhode Island is a former student of mine, and she sent me a copy and a set of. I thought it was kind of cool.
Wow, that's amazing. That really is. Yeah. Trading cards are actually a big thing. They have a big convention in New Jersey every year, just a trading card convention. Everyone imaginable. But anyway, thank you so much for coming, Tom. I really enjoyed listening to your perspective,
I appreciate it. I
and
enjoyed
we
being
look forward to
We
seeing
could
your.
talk for hours, I think, Kimber, couldn't we? So many
here.
more questions.
Well, not
Sure.
only on the Lizzie Borden case, but just other crimes
Forensic.
and policing, and I mean it's a fascinating topic. It really
We've
is.
scratched the surface.
Next in August we're doing a podcast on just
Poison.
poisons. Yeah,
Poison. A
of the
woman's
1800s.
yes.
Goodness. Very good. Well, listen, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much, Tom, and we will talk soon. And send me your address so I can send you my
I'll
book.
I'll do that. I'll
All
do
right.
that. Thank you.
you so much.
Nice meeting you, Sharon.
Enjoy the beach.
Here.
Thank you.
So, Shelly, that was great. So next month we're doing the podcast on poisons of the 1800s.
Yeah, so we're talking about Jane Topin and Mary Cotton and a lot of the other lady killers and the weapon of choice, the inheritance powder, arsenic, and prussic acid.
Rena's getting her tea ready.
Oh, well, we'll have a special tea for that one for
Yes, a
sure.
poison tea. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. So we'll get to discuss other lady killers of the
Yes.
1800s, which will be interesting.
Yes.
So are you doing your gardening tomorrow, or that's all done?
I'm all done with the gardening.
Good.
Yeah. It was 2 long days. We had about 300 people here.
That's
And,
amazing.
yeah, it was great to come in and do the podcast where it's nice and cool and
Yeah.
recover 2 days outside the fresh air.
So I want to thank everyone for tuning in to our podcast. We're really having a good time with it, and I hope you all go to our sites. Shelly's site, I'm gonna put on my store, and you can look at her books too. You're coming out with a new one, right, in August? Is
I'm
that right?
hoping to get it done by August. I will be doing a trolley tour on August 4th.
Oh,
August is always full of Lizzie things to do,
that's
so I'm
nice.
hoping to get it done by then. Lost some time on that with COVID, unable to get into certain places, but it's coming out this year for sure. And we're shooting
So
for August.
the last thing that we would like to say is, Shelley, maybe you can say a few words about Leanne, and then we'll end on. I want to end on a good note, but we couldn't leave without mentioning her and honor her.
Yes, we really lost an icon in the Lizzie Borden community. For those who have stayed at the house, uh, Leanne and her partner Donald Woods uh, purchased the Lizzie Borden house at 92 Second Street back in 2004, and I went to work for her later the same year until I retired in 2016. Anyone that ever stayed there could vouch for what a welcoming, warm lady she was. And we were devastated last week when we lost her very suddenly. Um, we're still trying to process the
Yeah.
loss.
And I
And
remember talking to her for the very first time when the first time that I went to visit the house, they didn't have, you called on the phone to get a reservation.
that's right. Mhm.
And I got to speak to Leanne, of course, because she was doing the reservations, and she was so nice. And, you know, she was even at the house when you would visit, and she was always like so
Love
into it. And I found she was an actress and all these things that she did that were so cool.
very multifaceted person and
Yeah, for sure.
fascinating. Could regale you with stories for hours. We spent her last birthday at Maplecroft because we shared a birthday,
Oh,
and
wow. Okay.
I have video and photos of that. But it was my first time staying overnight at Maplecroft, and she made it very special for me and a couple of my friends. And it was a memorable time, and I'm glad we had that opportunity.
Yeah, of
She
course.
was 50, gone way too soon,
Yeah,
and a lot of very sad people
yeah,
trying to process this now.
yeah. So,
We
you know, in her honor, you know, we want to keep the Lizzie Borden community thriving, and hopefully, with this podcast, we can keep doing the facts. Have some interesting guests,
Yes.
and just keep promoting it in a respectable way. I want to say. With your beautiful website, you have warps and whelps. Why do I
Well,
get wefts? I always
well,
get stuck on that
here's
last one.
an here's an
Wefts.
easy way to remember it. You know, I have a bit of a background in textile conservation. The
Right.
weft goes right to left. It
Weft,
rhymes.
right to left.
And a
Weft.
loom, and the warp goes up and down. And
Oh,
it's kind of a homage to Fall River's textile uh,
yes.
industry, which launched the city. And also, it's the threads that make up a fabric. And then all these little facts and things that we talk about, it's like a thread. And when you weave it all together, you hope to have maybe solve some of the mystery when you combine all these little mm, threads and webs of knowledge.
Right.
It might shed some light um,
Right. And
on the
also, Hollister Press is a Hollister Press.
Hollister Press as our
Yes.
publishing.
And
And
then my book is Inadmissible: The Case of Lizzie Borden and Other Murderous Women, and now the Lizzie Borden Shop, which I'm really excited about. You should check it out. And that's about it. So until next time, we are
it went,
signing off,
yeah,
and
it
see you
always
guys.
was.
And thank you so much for tuning in. You're what makes this so much fun. Have a great night.
See you.